Imagine standing in front of 12 different publishers, clutching the manuscript you poured your heart into only to hear no every single time. That's exactly what happened to J.K. Rowling before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon. Rejection stings. It can feel like a door slamming shut, leaving you questioning your worth. But what if I told you rejection isn't the end of the road? What if it could actually be the fuel that propels you forward? That's where Stoicism comes in, an ancient philosophy that doesn't just help you endure rejection, but teaches you how to wield it as a weapon for growth. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending hardship doesn't exist. It's about seeing reality clearly and using every setback as raw material for strength. The Stoics, thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, faced exile, betrayal, and even death with a mindset that transformed obstacles into opportunities. They understood something profound. Rejection isn't personal, it's neutral. What makes it powerful or painful is the meaning we attach to it, and that's something we can control. In this video, we're diving into 25 Stoic beliefs that flip rejection on its head. These aren't just abstract ideas, they're practical tools. You'll learn how to reframe no as a redirection, how to detach your self-worth from outcomes, and how to channel frustration into unstoppable momentum. Whether you've faced rejection in love, career, or creativity, these principles will help you rise stronger. So if you're ready to turn every no into your next step forward, let's begin. The first Stoic belief shifts everything into focus. What happens to you matters far less than how you choose to respond. Think of rejection like a storm. You can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. This idea traces back to Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was born into slavery yet rose to teach emperors. He called it the dichotomy of control, a simple but life-changing framework. Some things are up to us, like our effort, attitude, and perseverance. Everything else, the opinions of others, external outcomes, even rejection letters, those lie outside our control. And here's the twist: suffering begins when we confuse the two. Take Thomas Edison, who faced countless failures before inventing the light bulb. When a reporter asked how it felt to fail 1,000 times, Edison famously replied, "I didn't fail. I just found 1,000 ways that didn't work." That's the Stoic mindset in action. Edison didn't waste energy resenting the rejections. He focused on what he could control: his persistence, his curiosity, his next experiment. Or consider Ludwig van Beethoven, who composed some of his greatest symphonies after going deaf. Doctors told him his career was over, but he scribbled in his journal, "I will seize fate by the throat." He couldn't control his hearing loss, but he could control how he adapted, using vibrations to feel the music, rewriting the rules of composition. Here's the practical takeaway: rejection isn't a verdict on your potential. It's feedback, often arbitrary and always outside your control. What's inside your control? Showing up again, refining your craft, choosing to see no as a detour, not a dead end. The next time you face rejection, ask yourself, where's my agency here? Maybe it's in dusting off your resume, revising your manuscript, or simply deciding not to let someone else's no define your story. That shift from helplessness to action is where Stoic power begins. One of the most radical ideas in Stoicism comes from Marcus Aurelius, who wrote in his private journal, "The obstacle is the way." At first glance, that sounds like empty optimism until you realize this wasn't some emperor lounging in luxury. He scribbled those words while leading brutal military campaigns, grieving the loss of his children and shouldering the weight of an empire. What he meant was simple yet transformative. Every rejection, every setback, every no contains the raw materials for your next victory. Modern thinkers call this antifragility, the rare quality of systems that don't just withstand chaos but thrive because of it. Your character works the same way. Take Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who was exiled to Corsica under false accusations of adultery. Most would crumble, banished to a rocky island, stripped of status, separated from everything familiar. But Seneca saw exile as a laboratory for his philosophy. With no distractions, he wrote some of his greatest works, sharpened his mind, and even turned the local wilderness into a classroom. Years later, when recalled to Rome, he wasn't just restored, he was upgraded. The man who returned was wiser, more resilient, and ultimately became the advisor to Emperor Nero. The exile that could have broken him instead forged him. This isn't about sugarcoating pain, it's about metallurgy. When a blacksmith tempers steel, he doesn't gently caress it with a feather. He repeatedly plunges it into fire, then cold water. That violent process aligns the metal's crystalline structure, making it unbreakable. Rejection does the same for your resolve. Each no is another strike of the hammer, another cycle of heat and pressure. The key is to stay in the forge instead of running from it. Look at tech entrepreneur Sarah Blakely, who faced rejection after rejection while pitching her idea for Spanx. One department store buyer even laughed her out of the office. Instead of quitting, she used each no to refine her pitch until finally landing a deal with Neiman Marcus. Years later, she reflected, failure isn't the outcome, failure is not trying. That's the anti-fragile mindset. Every closed door trains you to spot the hidden window. Here's how to practice this. Next time you're rejected, pause and ask, what skill is this forcing me to develop? Maybe a job rejection reveals gaps in your interview technique. A failed relationship teaches you boundaries you'd ignored. A publisher's no pushes you to rewrite a stronger manuscript. The Stoics called this amor fati, loving your fate, not because it's pleasant, but because it's your personal gym for greatness. Don't just tolerate obstacles, study them. They're not roadblocks, they're the curriculum. Imagine scrolling through social media, watching peers celebrate promotions, engagements, or viral moments while your own efforts go unnoticed. That sting you feel, it's not just envy, it's the subconscious belief that your value rises and falls with external approval. The Stoics, especially Musonius Rufus, called this out 2,000 years ago. He taught that true confidence doesn't come from applause but from something unshakable, your commitment to living with integrity. While modern culture equates worth with likes and accolades, Stoicism flips the script. Your value isn't something others grant you, it's something you cultivate within. Musonius Rufus, often overshadowed by Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, was the Stoic who asked a startling question. What good is praise if you haven't earned your own respect? He trained his students to endure criticism and resist flattery with equal indifference. Why? Because both distract from the only metric that matters, whether you're acting in alignment with your principles. Picture an athlete so focused on cheering crowds that they forget to train. The moment the stand's empty, their performance crumbles. That's the danger of outsourcing your self-worth. Now compare this to today's validation economy, where algorithms reward conformity and outrage. Every like triggers a dopamine hit, conditioning us to seek external rewards over internal growth. But here's what social media never shows. The inventor rejected 40 times before their breakthrough, the artist who worked in obscurity for decades, the quiet parent whose small daily sacrifices build a legacy no viral post could capture. Consider the story of Eleanor Roosevelt, who famously said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." She didn't just preach this, she lived it. Mocked for her appearance and outspokenness, she refused to let critics dictate her mission. Her resilience didn't come from popularity, it came from private resolve. She kept journals detailing her ethical commitments, much like Marcus Aurelius, reinforcing her backbone when the world pushed back. Practical takeaway. Audit your validation sources. Next time you feel the urge to check notifications after posting, pause. Ask, did I do this for the reward or the growth? Start small. Write down one act of integrity you're proud of today, something no one else may notice. That list becomes your compass. Over time, you'll stop flinching at silence or craving praise. You'll understand what Musonius meant. The person who needs approval is the person who hasn't yet approved of themselves. Confidence isn't loud, it's the quiet certainty that you're building something no algorithm can measure. Cato the Younger, the Stoic senator who defied Julius Caesar, had a saying carved into his daily habits: "I'd rather stand alone with virtue than sway with the crowd." When Rome's political tides turned against him, when former allies shrank into silence or switched sides, he didn't rage or beg. He saw their desertion as clarity. Stoics called this phenomenon the litmus test of loyalty. Rejection, betrayal, even ostracism, they're not just wounds. They're X-rays showing who's built to endure life's tremors beside you. History remembers Cato's unyielding stance against corruption, but few discuss the loneliness of that path. As Caesar's influence grew, Cato's friends dwindled from dozens to a handful. Plutarch records how he responded, hosting intimate dinners for those who remained, not to lament losses but to deepen bonds with those whose soul's fire couldn't melt. Modern psychology echoes this. Studies show crises remove an average of 70% of superficial relationships, leaving only those rooted in mutual respect. Consider the modern parallel of a startup founder. When funding falls through or a product tanks, the team often fractures. The fair weather colleagues jump ship while the truly committed stay to rebuild. Just as Cato found his core circle in exile, today's leaders often discover their real team only after failure. Sarah Blakely's early days with Spanx reveal this truth. Her first investor meeting ended with laughter, the second with silence, but her father had trained her with a Stoic question: "What did you fail at this week?" By reframing rejection as data, she spotted the allies who'd brainstorm solutions rather than those who'd bolt at setbacks. Here's the practice. Next time you face betrayal, whether a friend ghosts you or a colleague takes credit for your work, pause before reacting. The Stoics would urge you to dissect it like a scientist. Is this person's exit a loss or merely the universe removing a weak link? Write two lists, one naming those who left when things got hard, another noting who stayed to help carry the weight. The second list is your true network. As Seneca wrote to Lucilius, a single loyal friend is worth more than 1,000 acquaintances who vanish like smoke when the wind changes. This isn't about cynicism, it's about precision. Every rejection scrubs away the veneer of false alliances, leaving only those relationships that can survive storms. Like Cato, you'll learn to cherish the few who remain not for their numbers, but for their ironclad integrity. And that's a gift no easy victory could reveal. The Stoics drew a line in the sand between two experiences most of us conflate: pain and suffering. Physical discomfort, heartbreak, even the sting of rejection. Those are inevitable, but the endless reruns of "why me?", the sleepless nights obsessing over what you could have done differently, that's where you have a choice. Epictetus, who endured a lifetime of physical pain from his crippled leg, put it bluntly: pain is slight if opinion has added nothing to it. In modern terms, you can't control the initial shock of a breakup or a job rejection, but you control how long you marinate in it. Take the ancient story of the philosopher who lost his son. When friends came to console him, they found him not weeping but writing. "Grief is natural," he explained, "but despair is a guest overstaying its welcome." That's the pivot point. The moment pain becomes suffering is when we feed it with resistance. Think of emotional pain like a cut. The wound exists, but poking it daily guarantees infection. Modern psychology backs this. Studies on rejection show our brains light up in the same regions as physical pain, proving that emotional hurt isn't imaginary. But here's the critical finding. Those who ruminatively replayed rejections stayed in pain twice as long as those who acknowledged it and shifted focus. A job rejection might ache for days, but agonizing over it for months, that's self-inflicted. Consider how athletes handle injury. When a runner tears a ligament, they don't deny the pain, they rehab. Apply that to heartbreak. The initial grief is the torn ligament. Swiping through old photos, drafting unsent texts, that's skipping physiotherapy, the Stoic alternative. Seneca's advice to a grieving friend: let your tears flow, but not forever. Practical tools for this distinction. First, set a literal timer for venting. Give yourself 20 minutes to journal rage or sadness, then close the notebook. Second, ask the Stoic question: is this pain or am I creating suffering? If your mind keeps circling the same thoughts like a stuck record, that's voluntary. Third, borrow Marcus Aurelius' night ritual. Before sleep, review the day's hardships, not to dwell but to ask, where did I add unnecessary torment? This isn't about suppression, it's about sovereignty. Pain whispers, this hurts, suffering screams, this shouldn't have happened. The Stoic removes that second layer. When a rejection letter arrives, they feel the disappointment, then ask, what's next? When a relationship ends, they grieve, but don't chain themselves to a ghost. The wound remains, but the scars, those are optional. Picture a massive oak tree in a thunderstorm. When lightning splits its trunk, the tree doesn't take it personally. The storm wasn't targeting it, it was simply in the path of raw, impartial forces. That's the Stoic view of the universe, not malicious, not benevolent, just profoundly indifferent. Modern physics frames it similarly. Stars collapse, planets collide, black holes devour, all without a shred of intent. Your rejection, it's likely just another neutral event in this vast, uncaring cosmos. Marcus Aurelius meditated on this daily. As emperor, he faced revolts, plagues, and betrayals, yet his journals reveal no rants about fate's cruelty. Instead, he wrote, "The universe is change, life is opinion." Translation: events are blank slates until we scribble our interpretations onto them. A publisher rejects your manuscript. That's a fact. The thought, "they hated my work" or "I'm talentless," those are stories we paste onto the facts, turning weather into a personal hurricane. Consider NASA Voyager probes now drifting beyond our solar system. They weren't rejected by interstellar space. They encountered plasma storms and gravitational fields that simply exist. Engineers designed them to endure, not to whine about cosmic unfairness. Human rejection works the same way. When a date ghosts you or a client fires you, it's rarely about you. It's about their internal weather, shifting priorities, unchecked biases, or sheer bad timing. Einstein's theory of relativity offers another metaphor. Rejection isn't an absolute truth. It's relative to the observer's frame of reference. A novelist whose manuscript gets tossed might feel crushed until they learn the publisher had already filled their quota for the year. The Stoics would call this the echo effect. The initial event makes a sound, but the suffering comes from our own echoes bouncing back. Practical application. When rejection stings, borrow a physicist's detachment. Ask, what's the observable data here? Not, they hate me, but they said no today. Then, like a scientist adjusting an experiment, focus on variables you can tweak: your pitch, your timing, your resilience. The universe didn't conspire against you. It simply didn't pause to conspire for you either, and in that neutrality lies your freedom. When a rival senator publicly insulted Marcus Aurelius in Rome's forum, the emperor didn't lash out or demand punishment. He simply turned and walked away, leaving the man shouting at his retreating back. That silence carried more power than any retaliation. Stoics called this the unassailable fortress. While petty insults and rejections beg for a reaction, refusing to engage doesn't signal weakness. It declares that some battles aren't worth your energy. In an age where social media turns every slight into a public showdown, this ancient practice feels almost revolutionary. Marcus Aurelius ruled during plagues and wars, facing constant criticism from political enemies. Yet his journals reveal a startling discipline. The best revenge is to be unlike your enemy. When advisors urged him to punish detractors, he'd often reply, "If someone wrongs you, let their own guilt punish them." Modern psychology validates this. Studies show that reacting to hostility often escalates conflict, while strategic silence can diffuse it, and paradoxically makes the aggressor look smaller. Now contrast this with today's outrage economy, where algorithms reward fiery comebacks and public shaming. A celebrity gets cancelled over a decade-old tweet, a minor slight spirals into a #war. We've been conditioned to treat every rejection as a call to arms. But the Stoics ask, what do you truly gain? Even if you win the argument, you've still let someone else dictate your emotional state. Take the story of Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years under brutal conditions. Guards tried to provoke him daily, denying meals, mocking his cause. His response, he'd retreat into silent study, memorizing poetry and refining his vision for South Africa. Later, he admitted those years of enforced silence became his secret weapon. They expected rage. I gave them patience, and it confused them into respect. Here's how to practice this today. Next time you're ghosted after a job interview or publicly criticized, resist the urge to fire off that clever clapback. Instead, borrow a Stoic ritual. Carve out 48 hours of deliberate silence. Use that time to journal, exercise, or simply reflect. Often, you'll find the insult loses its sting when deprived of your attention. As Marcus wrote, the nearer a man comes to calm in the face of rejection, the closer he is to strength. This isn't passive surrender, it's active defiance. Silence forces the world to sit with its own noise. While others drown in performative anger, your quiet becomes the loudest statement of all, that your peace isn't negotiable. Shipwrecked off the coast of Athens, a young merchant named Zeno watched as storm waves swallowed his entire cargo. Silks, spices, everything he owned vanishing into the sea. Stranded with nothing but the clothes on his back, he wandered into a bookstore where the owner happened to be reading aloud from Socrates' teachings. That catastrophe, that total loss, became the pivotal moment that birthed one of history's greatest Stoic philosophers. Zeno's story captures a profound truth. Every no and every rejection, every dead end isn't a full stop. It's a comma redirecting you towards something more aligned. Modern science calls this the near-miss effect. Studies of successful entrepreneurs show their breakthrough ideas often come after an average of 32 rejections. Each no acts like a GPS recalibration, eliminating wrong turns and sharpening the path forward. Think of Thomas Edison's famous quote about the light bulb, but with a twist. He didn't just fail 1,000 times, he discovered 1,000 ways the market didn't want. Every rejection was market research in disguise. Now apply this to your own life. When a job application gets rejected, it's not a verdict on your worth, it's intel. Maybe the role wasn't the right cultural fit, or your skills align better with a different industry. Dating rejections, they're sparing you from mismatched partnerships, freeing you for someone truly compatible. Even creative rejections like J.K. Rowling's 12 publisher no's are often about timing or trends, not talent. The key is to treat each no like Zeno treated his shipwreck, as the universe stripping away distractions to reveal what actually matters. Consider how Pixar operates. Early drafts of their films are famously torn apart in brain trust meetings, where teams ruthlessly critique each other's work. Directors don't see this as failure. They call it plussing, using feedback to incrementally improve until the story shines. That's the iterative mindset. Rejection isn't a brick wall, it's sandpaper refining your edges. Here's how to practice this. After your next rejection, grab a notebook and answer 3 questions. First, what did this reveal about what I truly want? Second, what skill or insight did this force me to develop? Third, how does this free me for better opportunities? Over time, you'll start spotting patterns. Certain doors close so better ones can open. Like Zeno, you might look back one day and realize the worst moment of your life was the exact pivot point you needed. Because in Stoicism, there are no true dead ends, only course corrections in disguise. Epictetus spent his childhood as a slave, his body owned by another man, yet in his writings he speaks of a place no master could ever touch. He called it the inner citadel, an unshakable fortress of the mind where true freedom lives. Picture a medieval castle with towering stone walls. Outside, invaders shout insults and hurl arrows. But inside, the courtyard remains still, untouched by the chaos. That's your mind at its most resilient. The Stoics didn't just admire this idea, they built it through daily practice, brick by mental brick. Start with the most basic exercise, the morning premeditation. Before checking your phone or speaking to anyone, spend 5 minutes visualizing your inner citadel. Imagine criticism, rejection, and stress as those external arrows, loud perhaps, but powerless to breach your walls. Marcus Aurelius did this ritual as emperor, preparing for days filled with betrayals and impossible decisions. Modern neuroscience validates this. Studies show that visualizing emotional resilience activates the same brain regions used during actual challenges, strengthening your mental defenses before crisis strikes. Now layer in what Epictetus called the discipline of assent. When someone criticizes you, pause before instinctively reacting. Picture their words as a scroll being handed to you at the castle gate. You hold the power to roll it up and set it aside unread, or to unroll it and let its contents flood your mind. Software engineer turned philosopher Derek Sivers practices this by responding to harsh emails with a simple, "Thanks for your feedback." No defense, no counterattack, just a mental drawbridge lifting to protect his focus. For the skeptics who think this sounds like avoidance, consider the alternative. Every unexamined insult that slips past your gates takes root like a weed, draining energy better spent on growth. Researcher Brené Brown found that the most resilient people aren't those who ignore criticism, they're the ones who have built systems to filter it. They ask, does this feedback come from someone who's earned the right to my vulnerability? If not, it stays outside the walls. Strengthen your citadel's foundations with evening reflection. Each night, Seneca would review his day with 3 questions. What attempted to breach my peace today? Where did I leave my gates unguarded? How can I fortify those spots tomorrow? Try this with a modern twist track patterns in a notes app. After a week, you might notice that criticism from authority figures stings most, or that rushed decisions leave your mental gates ajar. Awareness alone reinforces your walls. The final test, voluntary discomfort. The Stoics would practice poverty, fasting, or cold showers not as punishment, but as stress tests for their inner citadel. Entrepreneur Tim Ferriss adapts this by scheduling criticism workouts, asking friends to critique his unfinished projects. Like a castle's pressure-treated wood, your mind needs controlled exposure to survive real storms. Your citadel isn't built in a day, but each time you pause before reacting to a snide comment, each time you filter feedback rather than absorbing it raw, you add another stone to walls that will eventually make you untouchable to life's chaos. As Epictetus put it, no one can hurt you unless you hand them the keys. Keep those keys tucked deep inside your fortress. Seneca once wrote to his grieving friend Lucilius, "Give yourself to sorrow, but not forever." This wasn't cold indifference, it was clinical observation from a man exiled for 8 years. He'd noticed something profound. The deepest wounds lose their edge when exposed to the steady march of days. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies tracking emotional recovery show the average person metabolizes rejection in 6 to 8 weeks, not because they move on, but because time creates distance from raw pain. The Stoics called this principle tempus medicus, Latin for time the physician. Consider how physical wounds heal. A fresh cut stings fiercely, but left alone, the body's repair mechanisms activate. Scabs form, tissues knit together. Emotional recovery follows the same biological template. brain scans of the recently rejected show hyperactivity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the neural alarm system for distress. But follow-up scans at the 8-week mark reveal this activity quiets naturally, not through effort but through exposure and adaptation. Seneca's exile letters reveal his personal experiments with this process. Banished to Corsica, he initially raged against the injustice. Then he began documenting his mental state daily, noting how specific pains, humiliation, isolation diminished incrementally when he stopped feeding them with attention. By year 3, he'd transformed his prison into a writing sanctuary, producing works that outlived Rome itself. His discovery: time doesn't heal by erasing pain, but by allowing new experiences to layer over it. Modern rejection research echoes this. A 2022 Harvard study tracked job seekers post-rejection. Those who engaged in structured daily activities, learning new skills, volunteering, recovered 40% faster than passive counterparts. The key wasn't distraction, but what psychologists call accumulated positives. Each small achievement rewired neural pathways, gradually overwriting the rejection narrative. Apply this like a Stoic. After rejection, create 2 timelines, one for emotion, one for action. Let yourself feel the sting fully for 48 hours, no suppression. Then initiate a 30-day exposure protocol. Read rejection emails once, extract useful data, then file them away. Replace rumination with physical movement. Walking stimulates neurogenesis. Most crucially, track micro-wins daily. Marcus Aurelius' journaling habit worked because it recorded progress invisible in the moment. Time's magic lies in its indifference. It doesn't care if you're heartbroken or furious, it continues flowing regardless. The Stoic leverages this by treating weeks as scaffolding. Every sunrise is another brick in the wall between you and yesterday's pain. As Seneca observed, no tree becomes sturdy until weathering seasons. Your current rejection isn't the end of growth, it's the beginning of a deeper root system. The final insight comes from an unexpected source: forest ecology. When wildfires ravage landscapes, certain trees release seeds only in extreme heat. What appears as devastation is actually the trigger for new life. Human resilience follows the same pattern. Those who study trauma survivors find that post-rejection growth often yields unexpected strength, sharper discernment, creative pivots, even unexplored talents. Seneca's exile birthed his greatest works. Van Gogh's rejected paintings became masterpieces. J.K. Rowling's 12 publisher No's distilled her storytelling. None knew it in their darkest hours, but time wasn't their enemy. It was the silent alchemist turning leaden moments into gold. Your present rejection holds that same potential. The pain is real, the healing is inevitable, and the future, it's being written by every small step you take while the clock hands turn. A Silicon Valley founder opens their laptop to find their startup's valuation slashed overnight by investors. Their hands shake not just from the financial loss, but from the gut punch of perceived betrayal. Now imagine that same founder 3 months later, pitching a refined version of the idea with calm precision. What changed? Not the facts of the failure, but their relationship to them. This is the razor's edge between detachment and indifference that Stoics mastered 2,000 years ago, and it's never been more relevant. Modern culture often misreads Stoic detachment as emotional frostbite, but amor fati, the love of fate, was never about numbness. It's about seeing reality with the crisp clarity of a surgeon's scalpel. Epictetus framed it this way: don't demand that events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you'll go on well. When a startup fails, the amateur obsesses over, if only the market timed better, if only that key employee stayed. The Stoic founder audits the wreckage with forensic curiosity, asking, what now? Consider the story of Stuart Butterfield, who watched his gaming startup glitch collapse in 2012. Most would have seen corpses. He spotted organs worth transplanting. From Glitch's ashes rose Slack, a tool repurposed from internal team chats now valued at billions. Butterfield's pivot wasn't cold acceptance, it was heated transformation. Like a Stoic version of alchemy, he didn't just tolerate failure, he loved it enough to interrogate it. This mirrors the ancient practice of turning obstacles upside down. When Roman general Marcus Claudius Marcius was exiled, he didn't languish. He marched to a rival city, advising them on how to defeat Rome. Harsh, perhaps, but Stoicism distinguishes between attachment to outcomes, which breeds suffering, and commitment to purpose, which fuels reinvention. Modern founders like Brian Chesky of Airbnb exemplify this. When recession threatened their business in 2008, they didn't cling to their original air mattress rental model. They studied why bookings dipped, uncovering a universal truth. People craved authentic travel experiences. The crisis became their compass. The critical difference lies in what psychologists call decentering, the ability to observe your own thoughts as passing weather rather than absolute truth. When Twitter co-founder Ev Williams' first startup blogger faced near bankruptcy, he journaled through the crisis with almost stoic precision. "I'm not my company's valuation. I'm the person who solves problems." That shift from "this is happening to me" to "this is happening and I choose how to meet it" is the essence of Amor Fati. Practical application: next time you face professional rejection, run a 3-part autopsy. First, list every factual cause without blame: market conditions, feature gaps, etc. Second, identify one skill the failure forced you to develop, maybe negotiating or UX design. Third, and this is the Stoic twist, write a thank you note to the rejection itself. Not for masochism, but for the clarity it carved from chaos. This mindset thrives in Japan's startup scene, where the concept of fail fast, fail forward originated. Entrepreneurs hold funerals for failed projects, sharing lessons over sake. The ritual isn't about grief, it's about alchemizing experience into wisdom. Like Seneca writing from exile, they understand, fate's sharpest knives often carve the deepest channels for new rivers to flow. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop confusing what happened with who you are. Ancient Roman soldiers didn't wait for winter to toughen their bodies, they trained shirtless in snowdrifts before dawn. This wasn't machismo, it was strategic immunity building. The Stoics took this further with ascesis, voluntary discomfort designed to make life's inevitable rejections feel like minor scratches rather than gaping wounds. Modern science now confirms what Seneca practiced: controlled exposure to small stressors, cold showers, skipped meals, difficult conversations doesn't just build resilience, it rewires your brain's threat detection system. A 2023 Yale study found participants who took daily cold showers for 6 weeks showed a 30% reduction in rejection sensitivity. The mechanism: discomfort teaches your amygdala that temporary distress isn't an emergency. Consider the entrepreneur who forces himself to pitch 10 strangers daily, collecting rejections like trading cards. At first, each no stings. By the 100th attempt, the fear evaporates, not because he stops caring, but because he's proven to his nervous system that rejection won't kill him. This mirrors Marcus Aurelius' dawn ritual of wearing thin tunics in winter. What once seemed unbearable becomes routine. Modern Stoics adapt this through micro-rejection challenges. Author Tim Ferriss famously emails one unreasonable request weekly, asking a celebrity for coffee or a company for an absurd discount. Most ignore or refuse, but the practice isn't about winning favors. It's about dismantling the terror of hearing no. Like a vaccine injecting tiny amounts of a virus to prevent future disease, these small doses of rejection inoculate against career-ending panic when bigger opportunities crumble. The key lies in progression. Start with trivial rejections, ask a barista for a free muffin upgrade. Gradually escalate to vulnerable asks, request feedback from someone who ignored your work. Cognitive behavioral therapists call this exposure hierarchy. The Stoics called it the ladder to freedom. Each rung strengthens your emotional immune system until, like a sailor calloused by rope burns, you handle life's friction without blistering. Winston Churchill embodied this with his Black Dog of Depression. He'd deliberately schedule exhausting speeches in hostile venues, not to punish himself, but to prove he could endure hecklers and still think clearly. That's the hidden payoff of voluntary discomfort. It doesn't just numb you to pain, it sharpens your ability to function despite it. When a crisis hits, you're not paralyzed. You've already run the drills, practical implementation, design your own rejection curriculum. Week 1, strike up conversations with 3 strangers daily. Week 2, submit work you know will be critiqued. Week 3, negotiate prices at flea markets. Track how your heart rate stabilizes over time when facing no. The goal isn't to eliminate discomfort, but to stretch your capacity for it like a runner increasing mileage. Soon, what once felt like a rejection avalanche becomes mere pebbles underfoot. As Seneca wrote from exile, the man who sweats daily in training need not fear the battlefield. Your daily micro-rejections are the gym where your resilience muscles grow. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal filled with relentless self-interrogation, often addressing his harshest critics by name, not to curse them but to thank them. That which opposes you, he wrote, becomes your training partner. Imagine the Roman emperor draped in purple robes, pausing mid-war to record how a senator's insult revealed his own vanity, or how a rival's mockery exposed a weakness in his logic. This wasn't masochism, it was advanced emotional jiu-jitsu. The Stoics viewed criticism like a blacksmith views hammer strikes not as attacks, but as mandatory forces shaping something stronger. Modern psychology confirms this ancient wisdom. Studies on performance improvement show that elite athletes and top-tier executives share one unexpected habit. They actively seek out negative feedback while their peers avoid it. The difference lies in what researchers call cognitive framing. Where most see a verbal assault, the resilient see a free diagnostic tool. When a startup founder receives a blistering product review, the amateur fixates on the tone. The Stoic asks, what valid pain point is buried beneath the hyperbole? Take the case of Chef Gordon Ramsay. His kitchens operate like Stoic boot camps, where brutal critiques of undercooked meat or sloppy plating aren't personal indictments, but precision instruments for culinary excellence. Ramsay himself endured this gauntlet as a young chef in Paris, where mentors would throw imperfect dishes in the trash without explanation. Rather than crumbling, he learned to dissect each rejection for technical insights, eventually developing what food critics call the most refined palate in Europe. Practical application begins with what psychologists term the feedback triage system. When criticism lands, sort it into 3 mental bins. Bin 1 for factual inaccuracies, ignore these. They reveal more about the critic's ignorance than your flaws. Bin 2 for ugly delivery containing truth, strip the emotional wrapper to extract the core lesson. Bin 3 for brutal but accurate observations, these are gold. They highlight blind spots you'd never detect alone. Author Ryan Holiday practices this by keeping a criticism ledger, where he transforms each harsh review into bullet-pointed improvements for his next book. The most transformative technique comes from Seneca, who advised, when insulted, become your own cross-examining attorney. If someone calls you lazy, don't react, interrogate. What specific behaviors gave this impression? Did I delay responding to emails, miss deadlines? How can I systematize against this? This turns critics into unwitting accountability partners. Consider how Nobel Prize-winning scientist Barbara McClintock handled peer ridicule of her groundbreaking genetic research. Colleagues called her theories fantasies and dismissed her for decades. Instead of fighting back, she used their objections to refine her experiments, eventually proving phenomena so advanced that the scientific community needed 40 years to catch up. Her critics didn't just make her work better, they forced her to make it bulletproof. The Stoic reframe is simple yet radical. Every critic is a volunteer coach pointing at leaks in your armor. The louder they shout, the clearer you see where reinforcement is needed. As Marcus penned in the dead of night on some Germanic battlefield, the obstacle becomes the way not around you but through you. Your harshest detractor might just be the unpaid mentor you didn't know you needed. Heraclitus stood by the same river twice, or so he claimed. The water swirling past his feet would never be the same, just as the man himself had changed between visits. His famous metaphor holds a key to understanding rejection. Life flows like that river, constantly reshaping its course, and every slammed door is often just the current nudging you toward uncharted but richer shores. The Stoics didn't know Heraclitus personally, but they borrowed his wisdom wholesale. When a path crumbles beneath you, it's not sabotage. It's the universe rerouting you around future dead ends you can't yet see. Steve Jobs voiced this same idea 2 millennia later in his legendary Stanford commencement speech. Fired from Apple, the company he built, he described that rejection as the heaviness of being successful replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. The software company NeXT he founded post-firing, it became the technological backbone for Pixar's animation revolution. When Apple eventually acquired NeXT, Jobs returned with skills and perspective he'd never have gained coasting on past glory. As he put it, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backward. That's Stoic redirection in modern terms, trusting the river's flow even when it pulls you from familiar banks. History brims with these pivot points. The chemist Stephanie Kwolek intended to become a doctor, but post-World War II lab shortages forced her into temporary work at DuPont. Rejection from medical school stung until she invented Kevlar in that detour job, saving millions of lives with bulletproof vests. The Stoics would nod knowingly. Like Heraclitus River, rejection often carries us to destinations we didn't chart but desperately needed. Practical application starts with mapping your own river currents. After a rejection, grab a sheet of paper and draw 2 columns. Left side, list every opportunity this no might be shielding you from a toxic workplace, a mismatched relationship, a creative project doomed by half-hearted commitment. Right side, jot down new paths now unlock, time to retrain, freedom to relocate, or simply mental space to reassess. This isn't wishful thinking, it's strategic cartography. When Spotify rejected musician Zoe Keating's early submissions, she turned to self-releasing albums online only to pioneer the direct-to-fan model now standard in the industry. The final layer, cultivate what psychologist Carol Dweck calls the hindsight reflex. Regularly revisit past rejections to spot their hidden breadcrumbs. That college you didn't get into led you to a mentor at your safety school. The startup failure freed you to join the company where you'd meet your co-founder. Like Heraclitus stepping back into his ever-changing river, you'll start seeing rejection not as interruption but as the very current carrying you home. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, dropped a truth bomb that still echoes in therapists' offices today. Men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of them. Picture this: 2 co-workers get passed over for the same promotion. One spirals into bitterness, convinced the boss has it out for them. The other shrugs and starts updating their resume that night. The event is identical, the suffering is optional. This isn't just philosophy, it's the foundation of modern cognitive behavioral therapy, where psychologists help patients spot the invisible glue sticking thoughts to emotional pain. Dr. Albert Ellis, who pioneered CBT in the 1950s, credited Stoicism directly. His famous ABC model maps exactly to Epictetus' teaching, activating events like rejection. Don't cause consequences, distress. It's our beliefs sandwiched between that do the damage. Here's how it plays out in real time. When your romantic partner walks out, the raw fact is they've left. The sentence, "They left because I'm unlovable." That's a story you're telling yourself, and it's that narrative, not the breakup itself, that fuels the all-night ice cream binges. The magic happens in the gap between stimulus and response. Basketball legend Michael Jordan exploited this space ruthlessly. After being cut from his high school varsity team, a rejection that would devastate most 15-year-olds, he didn't internalize failure. Instead, he told his mother they made a mistake. That simple reframe turned humiliation into rocket fuel. By morning, he was shooting hoops in the dark, launching the work ethic that would redefine sports. Clinical psychologists now teach this as cognitive distancing. When a negative thought arises, "that editor rejected my book because I'm a fraud," you literally visualize the words printed on a leaf floating down a stream. The technique works because it mirrors Epictetus' insight. You're not your thoughts. You're the observer who gets to choose which thoughts deserve boarding passes in your mental airport. Consider how Navy SEAL train for captivity. Instructors scream insults during Hell Week not to break recruits, but to reveal how quickly the mind fabricates meaning from chaos. One trainee hears "you're pathetic" and collapses. Another hears the same words and thinks, "they're testing my focus." Same stimulus, diametrically opposed outcomes. Here's your practical toolkit. First, the triple column exercise. When stung by rejection, document the event left column, your immediate thought middle, then craft an alternative interpretation right. That job rejection might morph from "they hated me" to "their budget got cut." Second, adopt the third-person perspective. Ask, "what would I tell my best friend if this happened to them?" The space created by that slight shift often reveals irrational self-punishment. The ultimate power lies in recognizing that no rejection letter, ghosting, or public slight carries emotional weight until you stamp it with meaning. Like a blank check, the event is neutral. Your endorsement gives it value. This doesn't mean pretending pain away. It means wielding the philosopher's scalpel to separate what happened from the stories we wrap around it. As Epictetus reminded his students while massaging his lame leg, lameness is an impediment to the body, not to the will. Your rejections might leave scars, but only you get to decide if they tattoo your soul. When Cato the Younger lost his bid for consul Rome's highest office to a corrupt rival, he didn't slink into obscurity or wage a smear campaign. Instead, he doubled down on exposing government corruption, eventually becoming the Senate's moral compass. His enemies expected him to crumble. Instead, he turned their mockery into jet fuel for his legacy. This is Stoic ambition at its finest, not the hollow "success as revenge" mantra of modern hustle culture, but a deliberate redirecting of energy towards something far more potent, undeniable excellence. Cato's story cuts through the noise of today's toxic productivity traps. Social media peddles hustle, porn, sleepless nights, grinding at all costs, while Stoicism offers something radically different. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Notice the distinction. It's not about outturning or outshining your detractors, but transcending their pettiness entirely. When a rival senator spread rumors about Cato's personal life, he didn't retaliate. He drafted legislation to curb electoral bribery. The gossip died, the laws endured. Modern psychology backs this approach. Studies on post-rejection motivation show that those chasing external validation, like proving critics wrong, hit burnout faster. But individuals who frame success as personal evolution, mastering a craft, solving meaningful problems, outperform long-term. Think of Serena Williams after controversial line calls. She said in interviews, "I don't win to silence people. I win because I respect the game enough to keep improving." That's Stoic success, ambition divorced from ego, where the work itself becomes the statement. Compare this to hustle culture's pitfalls. The entrepreneur working 80-hour weeks just to show them all often craters from resentment. Their motivation is a sugar rush, intense but unsustainable. Meanwhile, the Stoic architect quietly refining blueprints after a rejected proposal. They're playing chess while others rage at checkers. Here's the pivot: transform rejection sting into creative capital. When painter Vincent van Gogh's work was dismissed as clumsy, he didn't dilute his style. He leaned into bold brushstrokes, birthing a movement. Tech CEO Arlan Hamilton, rejected by hundreds of investors, didn't shrink her vision for backstage capital. She used each no to refine her pitch, eventually funding overlooked founders and rewriting venture capital's rules. Practical application: build your anti-revenge success tracker. Each time you face rejection, log 2 actions: one that elevates your skills, taking a course, soliciting feedback, and one that serves a bigger mission, mentoring someone, volunteering. Over time, this shifts your focus from beating critics to outgrowing them. As Seneca wrote from exile, "The heights charm us, but the steps do not." True success isn't a mic drop. It's the quiet certainty that you've become someone no rejection can define. Seneca sat on the rocky shores of Corsica, banished from Rome's marble halls under false charges, and began writing letters that would outlast the empire itself. At first glance, his exile seemed like a tragedy stripped of wealth, status, and home. But read those letters today and you'll find no self-pity. Instead, he crafted something astonishing, an alchemy of perspective that transformed his suffering into timeless wisdom. He called it the crucible of circumstance, the practice of taking raw rejection and forging it into a story that empowers rather than crushes. This wasn't denial, it was narrative mastery. Modern psychology reveals a fascinating parallel. When researchers asked subjects to recount past rejections, those who framed them as pivotal moments in a larger growth story showed significantly higher resilience. The facts didn't change: the layoff, the breakup, the failure, but the meaning attached to them did. One group saw dead ends, the other turning points. The Stoics were the original architects of this reframing. Seneca didn't just endure exile, he weaponized it, writing, "This barren rock is my finest classroom." His letters became the foundation of Stoic thought precisely because they were forged in hardship, not despite it. Consider the difference between two entrepreneurs describing the same startup failure. The first laments, "I wasted 3 years on a doomed idea." The second reflects, "That collapse taught me to spot unsustainable unit economics, which made my next venture viable." Both are truthful, but one version paralyzes while the other propels. Journaling is the bridge between these narratives. Marcus Aurelius never intended his meditations for publication. They were private pages where he processed betrayal and stress into philosophical clarity. Your own journal can serve the same purpose. Here's how to practice Seneca's narrative alchemy. First, document the rejection factually. No adjectives, just events. Submitted manuscript, received form, rejection. Then write 3 alternate interpretations. Maybe the editor was overwhelmed that day. Perhaps your pacing needs work. Or it could mean traditional publishing isn't your path, and self-publishing will give you creative control. The exercise isn't about positive thinking. It's about expanding your story options beyond the default tragedy setting. History's most resilient figures did this instinctively. When Albert Einstein's early academic applications were rejected, he didn't internalize it as "I'm unworthy." He later reflected, "Those closed doors forced me to develop unconventional thinking." Beethoven didn't title his final symphony after his deafness. He called it Ode to Joy, transforming personal loss into universal celebration. Even fictional heroes follow this arc. Rocky Balboa's "It ain't about how hard you hit" speech was born from Stallone's own years of poverty and rejection. Your struggles gain power when they become part of your lore. A chef who burns a dish can frame it as humiliation or the origin story of her signature fire-charred technique. A writer whose novel is rejected 20 times can either quit or become the author who jokes, "I collected enough rejection slips to wallpaper my office, then kept going." The Stoics knew this truth. The same event that breaks one person becomes another's defining moment. not because circumstances differ, but because the stories we attach to them do. Start tonight, open a notebook and answer Seneca's pivotal question. How might this rejection serve me 5 years from now? Not with hollow optimism, but with the clear-eyed vision of an author crafting your next chapter. Because here's the secret no one tells you: your greatest setbacks often become the most compelling scenes in the story only you can tell. The ancient Stoics had a name for soft beds, lavish meals, and uninterrupted praise. They called them the silken chains. While modern self-help preaches comfort as the ultimate goal, thinkers like Epictetus warned that luxury wasn't just distracting, it actively eroded resilience. Fast forward 2,000 years, and neuroscience confirms this startling truth. Brain scans reveal that people who face regular, manageable challenges develop thicker myelin sheaths around neural pathways, essentially insulation that makes thought processes faster and more efficient. Rejection isn't just an inconvenience, it's biological weightlifting for your mind. Consider the hippocampus, the brain's memory center. Studies on London taxi drivers who must memorize the city's labyrinthine streets show this region physically expands with use. But here's the catch: growth only happens when navigating unfamiliar routes. Take away the challenge and the hippocampus shrinks. This mirrors the Stoic principle of antifragility, systems that strengthen under stress. When you're rejected, whether by a potential employer or a romantic interest, your brain is forced to rewire. Neural pathways tied to outdated assumptions get pruned, while new connections form around hard-won insights. History's most resilient figures understood this intimately. Theodore Roosevelt lost both his mother and wife on the same day at 26, then fled to the Dakota Badlands to work as a rancher. The brutal winters and grueling labor didn't just distract him, they transformed his physique, work ethic, and eventually his presidency. He later wrote, "Black care rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough." Modern psychologists would say he was triggering BDNF, a protein released during strenuous activity that acts like fertilizer for brain cells. The practical application. Design your own discomfort curriculum. Writer Tim Ferriss schedules weekly, fear-setting sessions, consciously initiating awkward conversations or attempting skills he'll likely fail at first. Not to punish himself, but to stretch his tolerance for productive discomfort. Similarly, entrepreneurs like Sarah Blakely credit their success to being comfortable being uncomfortable, a mindset sharpened by early rejections when selling fax machines door to door. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman's research reveals another layer. His lab found that brief, intense stress like cold showers or public speaking, followed by deliberate recovery, spikes acetylcholine production. This neurotransmitter helps the brain mark lessons learned during challenge, making them stick. The Stoics practiced this through voluntary hardship, sleeping on floors, fasting, or wearing thin clothes in winter. Not as punishment, but as cognitive cross-training. Here's your training protocol. First, identify a comfort zone you've overprotected, maybe avoiding networking events or quitting projects at the first sign of friction. Then, schedule micro-challenges. Attend one industry mixer weekly or commit to finishing a project despite imperfections. Track not just outcomes, but how your tolerance for discomfort expands. Like a muscle, resilience only grows when pushed past its current limits. The final insight comes from an unexpected source: lobster biology. To grow, a lobster must shed its rigid shell, a vulnerable process where it's soft and exposed. But this momentary fragility is the only path to greater size and strength. Human growth follows the same rhythm. Every rejection strips away an old identity, leaving you temporarily raw. The Stoics would remind you, this isn't danger, it's the necessary mold toward your next, more resilient form. Comfort isn't just overrated, it's the quicks, and that keeps you from reaching firmer ground. Marcus Aurelius woke each morning and whispered a strange greeting to the day ahead. "I was made for this. not when the sun shone on his imperial parades, but when barbarians hammered Rome's gates, when plagues emptied the streets, when advisors betrayed him. This wasn't blind optimism, it was radical acceptance of a core Stoic truth. You don't encounter obstacles by accident. You meet them because you're designed to overcome them, like a sword forged in fire to cut through resistance. The Stoics saw life's trials as something more than random misfortune. They called them procope, divinely orchestrated tests to reveal and refine your hidden strengths. Picture a blacksmith tempering a blade. He doesn't randomly strike metal, he targets weak points, knowing exactly where to hammer to align the crystalline structure. The universe, to a Stoic, works the same way. Your current struggle isn't punishment, it's precision training. Consider how trees grow strongest. Ecologists found that trees exposed to constant wind develop something called stress wood, denser fiber that makes them nearly unbreakable. No arborist would ever recommend shielding saplings from all wind. They'd grow tall but snap at the first storm. Marcus Aurelius meditated on this daily, writing, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. History's greatest comebacks embody this principle. When Beethoven's hearing faded, he didn't just persist, he revolutionized music by composing frequencies he could feel rather than hear. His late quartets, written in near-total deafness, contain vibrations that bypass the ears entirely, resonating in listeners' bones. What doctors called a disability became his competitive edge. That's procope in action. The obstacle didn't just get removed, it became the scaffolding for genius. Modern neuroscience explains why this works. When faced with challenges, our brains release brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, a protein that stimulates neuron growth. But here's the key, BDNF production spikes highest not during easy wins, but when we're pushed just beyond current capacities. The Stoics intuited this 2 millennia ago. Your toughest rejections aren't roadblocks, they're biohacks triggering your next evolutionary leap. Practical application starts with reframing resistance. Next time you face a crushing setback, ask 2 Stoic questions. First, what dormant strength is this situation demanding I activate? Maybe a layoff forces you to finally launch that side hustle. A failed relationship teaches emotional boundaries. Second, how could this exact problem become my unfair advantage? Sarah Blakely's early struggles selling fax machines door to door trained her to handle investor rejections for Spanx. The ultimate test comes from Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz by finding meaning in suffering. His observation, when we can't change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves, mirrors Epictetus' teaching that difficulties show men what they are. In your darkest hour, remember, the universe isn't breaking you. It's revealing the unbreakable version of you that's always existed, waiting for the right pressure to emerge. Like a diamond compressed from coal, your current friction isn't destroying you. It's creating something infinitely harder, brighter, and more valuable than before. A rejected manuscript lands on an editor's desk, not just as words on a page, but as a mirror reflecting unseen biases. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. When Epictetus taught his students to welcome criticism, he wasn't promoting masochism. He was handing them a shovel to dig up the buried assumptions skewing their judgment. Modern psychology calls these cognitive blind spots. The ancients called them the shadows we mistake for walls. Every rejection carries traces of these hidden distortions, if you know how to look. Consider the Roman general Scipio Africanus, who famously lost early battles due to overconfidence. After each defeat, he'd gather his officers and ask, "What did I refuse to see?" His journals reveal a meticulous 3-column system, one for tactical errors, another for misread terrain, and a third titled, "The Lies I Told Myself." That third column held the gold. It recorded assumptions like, "The enemy will retreat at dawn," or "My reputation alone will sway them." These weren't just mistakes, they were evidence of subconscious biases whispering false certainties. Fast forward to modern Silicon Valley, where startup postmortems have adopted this same rigor. When a product flops, growth teams don't just ask why users left. They dig for the unquestioned truths that blinded them, perhaps assuming millennials would prioritize convenience over privacy, or that viral marketing could compensate for weak onboarding. These are the cognitive equivalent of optical illusions, invisible until someone points them out. Here's how to conduct your own Stoic bias audit after rejection. First, document the facts without interpretation. The client said no after the second meeting. Then, list every assumption you carried into that interaction. Did you presume your expertise was self-evident, that they valued price over reliability? This step stings because it reveals how often we confuse our perspectives with universal truths. The second layer is more revealing. Trace the ancestry of those assumptions. Like a genealogist tracking family traits, ask, when did I first believe this? Maybe your conviction that prestige matters most stems from that professor who mocked state schools, or your fear of oversharing links back to a childhood punishment for talking too much. Marcus Aurelius practiced this nightly in his journals, scribbling, "Today's stubbornness, from where did it spring?" The final step is where Stoicism diverges from modern self-help. Instead of discarding these biases, you'll weaponize them. For every problematic assumption uncovered, design a deliberate exposure therapy. If you assumed your art wasn't commercial enough, submit to edgy galleries and mainstream ones. If you thought your age disqualified you from tech jobs, pitch both startups and corporate boards. Like a scientist running control experiments, you'll gather data to recalibrate your instincts. Take the case of Chef Jose Andres, whose early restaurants struggled until he spotted his hidden bias. Fine dining must be formal. When a hurricane devastated Puerto Rico, he set up makeshift kitchens serving gourmet meals on paper plates. That crisis birthed World's Central Kitchen and proved his hot cuisine could thrive without white tablecloths. His rejection wasn't just feedback, it was an X-ray showing where his world you needed flexibility. This process works because it treats biases like outdated software, not as personal flaws, but as programs needing updates. When a venture capitalist passes on your pitch, don't just tweak the slides. Ask what invisible criteria you missed. When a publisher rejects your novel, don't just edit the prose. Examine the unspoken literary rules you might have dismissed. As Seneca wrote while exiled, the tightest chains are the ones we don't feel. Every no contains clues to locks you didn't know were binding you. The ultimate goal isn't to eliminate biases, that's impossible. It's to spot them faster, like a sailor reading shifting winds. Over time, you'll develop what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking from a distance. And that's the real gift of rejection, not just thicker skin, but clearer vision, because the deepest insights rarely come from praise. They emerge when the world holds up a mirror and says, "Look closer." The stock market crashes, then it recovers, then it crashes again. Investors who panic sell at the first dip often lock in permanent losses, while those who understand cycles ride the waves to long-term gain. This same principle applies to rejection, a truth the Stoics grasped 2,000 years before Wall Street existed. While modern culture worships linear success stories, the meteoric rise, the unbroken win streak, the Stoics saw time as a spinning wheel where every descent prepares the next ascent. Seneca put it bluntly, setbacks are not the opposite of progress, they're part of its architecture. Consider how nature operates. Forests burn to make way for new growth. Rivers flood to replenish fertile soil. Even our bodies rebuild stronger muscles by first tearing them down. The Stoics observed these patterns and applied them to human struggles. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way," he wasn't offering a motivational platitude. He was describing a fundamental law of resilience. Temporary defeats aren't detours, they're necessary phases. In the same way winter prepares trees for spring, modern success myths distort this reality. Social media feeds showcase highlight reels without showing the hundreds of unseen takes. Biographies condense years of struggle into single chapters titled Overcoming Adversity. This creates what psychologists call destination fallacy, the illusion that successful people moved smoothly from point A to B without messy zigzags. The truth, J.K. Rowling's post-rejection net worth didn't jump from zero to $1 billion overnight. It inched forward like a stock chart, peaks, valleys, and all. The stock market analogy holds surprising depth. Day traders obsess over minute-by-minute fluctuations, while seasoned investors focus on quarterly trends. Similarly, amateurs measure progress in days, feeling crushed when a single rejection derails them. Stoics think in seasons. When Thomas Edison's lab burned down in 1914, destroying years of prototypes, he didn't collapse under the setback. He rebuilt within weeks, later saying, "Thank goodness all our mistakes were burned up. Now we can start fresh." That's cyclical thinking, recognizing that destruction often precedes innovation. Practical application starts with reframing your timeline. After a rejection, sketch 2 graphs. The first plots your progress hour by hour. It'll look like a heart attack on paper. The second charts growth year by year, where setbacks become minor dips in an overall climb. Software developer and investor Paul Graham calls this the trough of sorrow, the inevitable valley between early excitement and lasting success. Crossing it requires trusting cycles, not fighting them. History's greatest comebacks follow this rhythm. Steve Jobs' ouster from Apple looked like career suicide until it fueled his Pixar and NXT adventures, which ultimately brought him back to revolutionize Apple. Beethoven's Heiligenstadt Testament, where he confessed his despair over deafness, was written the same year he composed his groundbreaking Third Symphony. Neither man knew their comeback was coming, but both kept working through the dip. Here's the Stoic toolkit for cyclical resilience. First, adopt pre-mortem thinking. Before starting any project, envision 3 possible setbacks and plan your recovery moves in advance like a chess player anticipating losses. Second, track your patterns. Just as investors review quarterly reports, keep a resilience ledger, noting how you bounced back from past rejections. Over time, you'll see your recovery speed improve. Third, embrace rhythmic effort. Olympic athletes periodize training with planned recovery weeks, follow their lead by scheduling rebuilding phases after major rejections. The ultimate insight comes from an unexpected source: bamboo farmers. For years after planting, bamboo shows no visible growth, just underground root development. Then suddenly, it shoots up 90 feet in weeks. Human growth often follows this pattern. What looks like stagnant failure may be invisible preparation. The Stoics didn't measure progress in days because they knew, like the bamboo, the stock market, and every natural system, true resilience isn't about avoiding falls. It's about mastering the rhythm of rising each time with the certainty that no winter lasts forever. Musonius Rufus, the lesser-known but fiercely practical Stoic teacher, posed a question that cuts to the bone of self-doubt. If a lamp is placed under a basket, who does it serve? His point wasn't about interior decor. It was about the moral obligation to let your light shine, regardless of how many hands try to dim it. Today, we'd call this battling imposter syndrome. That gnawing voice whispering you're a fraud every time you face rejection isn't humility. It's a betrayal of your duty to contribute. The Stoics believed excellence wasn't optional. It was your tax for occupying space on Earth. Take the story of architect Zaha Hadid, whose groundbreaking designs were initially dismissed as unbuildable. Critics scoffed at her fluid, gravity-defying structures, rejecting her proposals for decades. Hadid didn't just persevere, she leaned into her uniqueness, creating an entirely new architectural language. Her eventual Pritzker Prize win wasn't just personal vindication. It expanded humanity's vision of what buildings could be. That's the Stoic duty to shine in action. When the world says your voice is too different, that's not a signal to conform. It's proof you're offering something it didn't know it needed. Modern psychology reveals why this works. Studies on optimal distinctiveness show that people feel most motivated when they balance fitting in with standing out. But here's the twist: rejection often forces us into our most distinctive contributions. Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton was initially rejected by traditional theater producers for blending hip-hop with history. Their dismissal didn't mean the idea was bad, it meant the market lacked a category for it yet. Miranda's response: he didn't dilute the vision. He performed the first song at the White House, proving its power directly. Sometimes rejection isn't about your work's quality, but about the world's sluggishness in recognizing originality. Musonius took this further with his concept of philotechnia, love of craft. He taught that true mastery neutralizes imposter syndrome because you're no longer comparing yourself to others, you're measuring against your own potential. Consider Marie Curie, rejected from the French Academy of Sciences despite her Nobel Prize. She didn't waste energy protesting, she doubled down on research, ultimately winning a second Nobel in a different field. Her notebooks are still radioactive a century later. That's not just persistence, it's the Stoic understanding that excellence radiates whether institutions acknowledge it or not. Here's how to operationalize this today. First, conduct a distinctiveness audit. List 3 qualities that make your work unusual, not better or worse, just different. Second, track innovation rejection. Times your ideas were dismissed for being ahead of their time. Third, adopt Haddad's practice of radical envisioning. When told something's impossible, sketch how it could work anyway. The world doesn't need more polished copies. It needs your uncut vision, even if the market hasn't caught up yet. Because here's the secret hidden in Stoic physics. Just as no 2 atoms occupy the same space, no one else can fill your particular niche in the universe. Every rejection that tempts you to shrink is really a cosmic nudge to take up more room. As Marcus Aurelius wrote while battling self-doubt in his tent, the universe is neither improved nor damaged by one person's presence, but you are made poorer by every gift you withhold. Your voice isn't just welcome in the chorus, its absence would leave the song incomplete. Seneca would start his mornings with a peculiar ritual, not with affirmations or to-do lists, but by mentally rehearsing disaster. He called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Picture this: before leaving his villa, he'd visualize losing his wealth, his status, even his family. Not to dwell in gloom, but to disarm fear's grip. When actual hardship struck, like his eventual exile to Corsica, he'd already weathered those storms in his mind. This isn't pessimism, it's emotional inoculation. Modern psychology confirms its power. A 2021 Harvard study found that people who practiced worst-case scenario planning for 15 minutes daily reduced anxiety by 38%. Let's try it together right now. Close your eyes and conjure your deepest rejection fear, maybe losing your job tomorrow or your partner walking out. Now zoom in. What exactly happens next? If it's job loss, do you default on rent? Actually, you'd call the landlord, tap savings, maybe drive for Uber while job hunting. Your partner leaves, you'd cry, then call friends, rebuild routines. Notice what changes. Your skills don't vanish, your resilience remains. This exercise works because it replaces vague dread with actionable steps. Like a fire drill, it transforms panic into procedure. History's most resilient figures did this instinctively. Before the D-Day invasion, General Eisenhower drafted 2 press releases, one for success, another accepting full blame if Normandy failed. The mere act of writing the failure memo steeled his resolve. Similarly, when astronaut Chris Hadfield trained for spacewalks, he'd mentally script every possible malfunction, from oxygen leaks to tether snaps. By pre-living disasters, he turned potential terror into practiced responses. Here's how to apply Stoic premeditation daily. First, name your top 3 rejection fears. Write them brutally specific. Not "I'll fail," but "my prototype will get rejected by all 30 investors on my list." Second, script the aftermath step by step. You'd analyze feedback, pivot the design, seek smaller angel rounds. Third, and this is key, identify the hidden gifts. Maybe investor rejection forces you to bootstrap, retaining more equity. Perhaps a breakup frees you to relocate for that dream job. The twist: Seneca discovered that 90% of imagined horrors never materialize. The remaining 10%, you've already weathered them in your mind, so reality feels strangely familiar. Like a sailor who's mentally rehearsed storms, when the waves hit, you're not paralyzed, you're prepared. Your worst-case scenario isn't a cliff edge, it's terrain you've already mapped. And that changes everything. Thomas Edison didn't count his failures, he calculated them. When reporters asked about the thousands of unsuccessful attempts to invent the light bulb, he didn't say, "I kept trying." He said, "I found 2,000 ways how not to make a light bulb." That's not just optimism, it's probabilistic thinking, the Stoic art of treating rejection as raw data in an ongoing experiment. Every no you collect isn't a verdict on your worth. It's a data point adjusting the odds of your eventual success. The Stoics called this stochastics, the practice of seeing life as a series of calculated probabilities rather than absolutes. Consider how poker champions think. When a pro loses a hand, they don't rage at the unfairness. They update their mental model. Maybe they overestimated their bluff or misread an opponent's tell. Each loss sharpens their strategy for the next round. Rejection works the same way. Every job application denied, every pitch declined, every romantic rejection is feedback refining your approach. Modern startups embrace this with a /B testing, running multiple ad versions to see what resonates. Your life deserves the same analytical rigor. Edison took this further with what psychologists now call the learning loop. After each failed filament test, he'd log 3 variables: material used, voltage applied, and duration before burnout. Over time, patterns emerged. Certain materials failed predictably at specific temperatures. This data didn't just lead to the light bulb, it birthed entire electrical standards. You can apply this same method to your rejections. Did that job application fail at the resume screen or the final interview? Was your art submission rejected for style or technical execution? Like Edison's lab notes, these details aren't setbacks, they're the algorithm tuning your next move. The math behind this is startling. Statisticians studying creative breakthroughs found that most innovations follow the 1% rule. For every 100 attempts, 1 yields extraordinary results. But here's what the Stoics understood that most miss. Each rejection doesn't just bring you closer statistically, it actively improves your skills. Basketball legend Michael Jordan missed 64% of his career shots. Yet each miss trained his muscle memory, calibrated his timing, and studied defenders' weaknesses. His air balls weren't failures, they were tuition paid toward mastery. Practical application starts with the Stoic rejection ledger. Divide a notebook into 5 columns: date, attempt type, rejection reason, adjustments made, and probability shift. After a dozen entries, you'll spot trends. Perhaps your proposals fail most when targeting established firms but gain traction with startups. Maybe your dating profile attracts mismatches because of one misleading photo. Like a scientist tracking lab results, you're not emotionally attached to any single outcome, you're iterating toward inevitability. The deepest insight comes from an unexpected source: machine learning. AI models don't fail. They compute error gradients, adjusting weights until accuracy improves. Your rejections are those error signals. When author Catherine Stockett received 60 agent rejections for the help, she didn't just persist blindly. With each no, she tweaked her query letter, revised character arcs, and eventually landed a publisher. Her 61st attempt succeeded not despite the prior rejections, but because of them. This mindset transforms rejection from a stop sign into a compass. Every no whispers clues about where yes might hide. Edison's 2,000 attempts weren't a slog, they were a countdown. Your next rejection, it's not a full stop, it's the universe whispering, warmer, keep going. Marcus Aurelius would end his days with a simple ritual, standing barefoot on the cold marble of his palace, tracing the edges of a silver ring engraved with 4 Greek words, "This too shall pass." The emperor who commanded legions and ruled an empire returned each night to this humbling truth. Every victory fades, every storm breaks, and even the sharpest sting of rejection dulls with the turning of the earth. The Stoics didn't just preach impermanence, they weaponized it. While modern self-help urges us to live in the moment, the ancients went further. They taught that remembering life's fleeting nature is the ultimate armor against despair. Consider the difference between 2 soldiers in battle. One fixates on the arrow embedded in his shield, raging at its unfairness. The other acknowledges the wound but keeps marching, knowing the arrow will eventually rot, the shield will splinter, and even the war itself will become a footnote in some future historian's scroll. That's the Stoic mindset, not denying pain, but seeing it through the lens of time's vastness. Modern neuroscience validates this approach. Studies on emotional recovery show that people who reflect on past hardships from a future self perspective heal 40% faster than those stuck in present moment anguish. The contrast with today's culture couldn't be sharper, where social media amplifies every slight into a permanent crisis. Think viral cancel campaigns or career-ending tweets. The Stoics practiced memento mori, meditations on mortality that shrunk trivial rejections to their true size. Seneca wrote letters from exile, imagining how future generations might view his plight. Will this matter in 100 years, 1,000? When a startup founder obsesses over a missed funding round, they might reframe it by asking, "How will I recall this rejection when I'm mentoring young founders a decade from now?" History's most resilient figures shared this telescopic vision. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz by envisioning himself lecturing about the experience someday. Astronaut Scott Kelly endured a year in space by marking each passing day on the ISS as one step closer to Earth's embrace. Neither denied their suffering, they simply placed it in time's grand arc. Here's how to practice temporal resilience. First, adopt Marcus Aurelius' evening ritual. Review the day's rejections while visualizing your 80-year-old self looking back. Would they remember this pain or only the growth it sparked? Second, keep an impermanence journal. Record today's stings alongside past wounds you've outgrown. That college rejection letter, the freelance client who ghosted you. Over time, you'll spot patterns, the pains that felt eternal in the moment but now barely register. The final layer comes from an unexpected source, Buddhist monks who create intricate sand mandalas only to sweep them away. The lesson isn't that effort is futile, it's that detachment deepens appreciation. Every rejection is a grain in life's ever-shifting mosaic. Some will form patterns you treasure, others will scatter on the wind. The Stoics would remind you, your power lies not in clinging to any single grain, but in mastering the art of letting the whole masterpiece breathe. Because here's the secret hidden in plain sight, the same force that makes rejections fade also dissolves your greatest triumphs. The trophies tarnish, the applause fades, and even the grandest monuments crumble. But in that very transience lies your freedom. No can define you when even the mightiest yes is just a whisper in time's vast echo chamber. So when rejection's tide rushes in, don't fight it. Stand like Marcus on that cold marble floor, feeling the chill, watching your breath fog the air, and whisper to the storm, "This too, all of this shall pass." We've climbed through 25 Stoic beliefs together, each one a rung on the ladder from rejection to power. Let's retrace that ascent. It started with recognizing what's within your control, then transforming obstacles into fuel. You learn to detach self-worth from outcomes and let rejection reveal true allies. Pain became distinct from suffering, and cosmic indifference became your armor. Silence outmaneuvered pettiness, while every no was revealed as redirection. Your inner citadel grew stronger through voluntary discomfort, and criticism became your unpaid coach. Time was uncovered as the silent alchemist of healing, while ambition shed its vengeful skin in favor of lasting excellence. You mastered narrative alchemy, letting rejections forge your story rather than fracture it. Biases became visible, resilience became cyclical, and your duty to shine overpowered imposter syndrome. Worst-case scenarios lost their fangs through premeditation, while probabilistic thinking turned setbacks into data. Finally, impermanence became your compass, reminding you that even the deepest sting fades with time's relentless march. Now here's the truth no one tells you about ladders. They're useless unless you take the first step. That email sitting in your drafts, send it. That conversation you're avoiding, initiate it. That dream you've shelved after too many no's, resurrect it. Because your next rejection isn't a stop sign, it's a training ground stocked with 25 tools. The world will keep handing you reasons to quit. Stoicism hands you something better: reasons to continue, refined through 2,000 years of warriors, emperors, and philosophers who turned stumbling blocks into stepping stones. So I'm throwing down a challenge. The next time life says, "Not yet" or "Not you," I want you to reach for just one of these principles. Maybe it's asking, what's the data here? Instead of why me, perhaps it's drafting that thank you note to the rejection itself. Then, and this is crucial, come back here and tell us about it. Your story might be the torch that helps someone else through their darkest corridor. Because here's the secret Marcus Aurelius never wrote down: Stoicism wasn't meant to be practiced alone. It grows stronger when shared, like a fire passing from one lantern to the next. Your rejection arsenal is loaded. The world will keep firing. Now steady your aim, take a deep breath, and step onto the battlefield. Those arrows flying toward you, they're not just weapons anymore. They're the raw materials for your unshakable strength. Let's see what you build with them.